Welcome back, everyone. Our second panel will discuss how design drives urban innovation and sustainability, shaping smarter, greener, and more resilient cities. Let us welcome Ms. Michela Magas, founder and CEO, MTF Labs, Director, Industry Commons, and jury member of the design panel. Michela bridges design and technology, research and industry. She is chair and director of the research and innovation of the Industry Commons Foundation, advisor to the European Commission and G7 leaders, and president of the International Knowledge Graph Alliance. She founded MTF Labs and has received numerous awards for her contributions. Michela, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and we had a wonderful week with amazing colleagues judging really inspiring entries in design and architecture and designers of the year, which I'm sure you'll be hearing about shortly. My background is I come from a big family of architects. I grew up with architecture, but I went into design and graduated from the Royal College of Art in London. Spent most of my life in London. And I started there, this community of innovators that now counts over 8,500 global contributors, all in person. These are all gatherings of brilliant minds that are heavily curated. The biggest one we ran to date was over 800 people prototyping new solutions, joining disciplines, joining across disciplines, completely open, highly diverse. I would have a lot to say to the questions you posed in the last panel, actually, and I could definitely chip in the discussion that was had just now. But also, as transgeneration also, we've run things where the youngest was 4 and the oldest in the room 84 when we ran the large events. But it's really very much about these people coming together, and these events, they're week-long labs. They serve as what we would define as acupuncture points for personal and project development. And they are there to spark collaborations, start new projects, illuminate subject matter from different perspectives, and open new vistas. So I will run you through one particular segment of what we've been doing, been running this for the past 13 years. Around 15 years ago, I was asked to start to contribute to the European Commission, to join advisory programs 13 years ago. This community started by default. It was a byproduct of some ambition of mine to unite arts and sciences and academia and industry in a space of common understanding, which everybody said was incredibly difficult. And I want to dive in at a point now where we are considering sustainability and new approaches to how we think about it, which really was triggered by the pandemic and by our need to immerse ourselves in the natural environment. And so the first slide you will see is just blue. And what you're looking at is a map. This is obviously the most common mapping system we use in the world. And if you were to apply to this square of blue the same strategy that we've applied to land, you would now want to dissect it into neat little squares and sell it off. Now, what's really particularly striking about the fact that you're just seeing a square of blue is that it is really devoid of any markers, of any kind of value system. We don't give this really any significance to when we navigate our mapping systems, which is something that we all use now every single day. And you have to ask yourself, how are these systems designed and for whom? And it's not so much what lies beyond the blue, it's what's right in front of your eyes. So I will show you what you're looking at. This is a satellite image. This is an ecosystem that has been existing for the last 10 centuries and living in absolute harmony between human dwellings, which you see here. There are human dwellings, there are human-made constructions, there are natural constructions, there are salt pans that have been, where they've been cultivating salt, this beautiful fleur de sal for 10 centuries. And it's one of the richest biospheres in Europe. I'll show you where that is. It's called the Ria de Aveiro in Portugal. And it is one of the largest area of wetland and most diverse in terms of species. Of course, these people are not drawn in. These communities are not drawn in. If you go to the OpenStreetMap, which is a collaborative tool, they've drawn themselves in. People have drawn themselves in. This is people contributing to their own urban planning and their own signaling their own existence and their own settlements. And if you look at how this extends the city of Aveiro, actually, in reality, it extends it seamlessly. If you walk out onto the streets here, there are no barriers, there are no breakages. You walk straight onto into these neighborhoods. They are neighborhoods of the city, yet they're not signaled in our systems, in our other systems. These are the open maps where people draw themselves in. And this is where we immersed ourselves into that environment over a period of 3 years when we ran our labs there, to explore the boundaries between our cities and the water and our mapping systems, our ways of signaling to the world about the significance of these areas, and how can we actually rethink how we do urban planning or how we actually design for these ecosystems. We of course immerse ourselves in the local culture as well, which is highly diverse and very rich, and I want to give you a sense of it because this was a byproduct of our labs. One of our labs was a documentary that ended up winning a bunch of awards, so just a clip so that you get a sense.
Aveiro is a city right on Europe's last coastal marshland. It's the largest and most incredibly biodiverse wetland in Europe, and in 1687, the same engineers that built the dams to keep water out of Amsterdam came to Aveiro to bring the water in. I'm Andrew Dubber. I'm director of MTF Labs, a global community of brilliant artists and scientists who come together to address societal challenges through creative experimentation. Now, we've run 20 events worldwide, the last couple of which were in Aveiro, and it really seems to fit there. Now remember, this is a city that's been completely engulfed by the ocean twice. It's right at the front line of climate change. So what does that mean for a culture, for heritage, arts, innovation? I wanted to really understand this place and its people, the real people of Aveiro.
So this is us crossing into the salt pans. You can see full on with masks that first year. 50 people from 22 countries in person during one of the worst, well, at this point, this was the worst outbreak of the pandemic in Portugal, but we were under the watchful eye of the regional immunologist, and this was all in partnership with the municipality. And we started by looking at modern human ecosystems. So one of the biggest concerns was that these rich biospheres are not particularly anthropomorphic. They're not the kinds of creatures that live there. They're not the sorts of things that you would normally respond to, and there are various reasons for that. So, but there are beautiful structures where they inhabit. And so I want to highlight a couple of initial pieces. Well, there are very, very many projects that came out, and even like a 40-people symphony that was performed, but a couple of projects that started collaborations, that started other things. So very much kind of points for discussion and points that draw attention to certain issues. And in this case, instead of actually trying to observe life as it unfolds in these places, there were markers created by broadcasting the sound of life evolving, so we could actually listen to it. So a different strategy. And what's really great about this was that we run satellites simultaneously to our labs. So in this case, we had satellites coming in from IIT in Chicago and from Toronto and from Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México in Mexico City, where there was a cross-disciplinary lab run by researchers. And they have an area that has a rich biosphere that's also been neglected in the center of Mexico City, where they did the same. And then the two projects started to connect across the Atlantic. The other approach was to look at the slowdown that is required in order to observe the slow evolution of the species in these areas. And because slowdown has so left our culture, we've completely eliminated it. We just simply don't have the patience or the time to really devote to do this justice. And so what was created was using neural networks, these phenomenal artists. Since I'll show you what's happened with their work since, but basically as a leaping off point for the discussion, they started to build artificial life with neural nets based on the species that are living there, to draw attention, to speed up the life, to show it to us. These projects then evolve. As I say, they're acupuncture points for personal and project development, so the collaborations start with other artists and other designers and other experts from different fields. And in the following years, this evolved in collaborative projects that were all based on the idea of artificial life. And these were enormous exhibitions digital exhibitions in like Barcelona and Los Angeles. These are billboards in downtown LA where Sophia is exhibited, and galleries in LA. So all these projects, lots of these projects grow and start to have a life of their own. I also want to draw your attention to the process. So the following year, we continued with the experiments, and perhaps in the words of the people involved, you can actually get an idea of what that felt like.
And so we have actually sort of very unique ecosystems here, and they're part of this greater salt marsh system, which actually is, biodiversity-wise very important. There are well over 1,000 species recorded just in this lagoon here.
Artistically, it really inspires us to think of that there are organisms that adapted to these kind of environments.
So how can we engage and see these areas in a new light? What kind of layers can we add to this? Sound, visual, etc., that help sort of somehow bring forth the actual importance of these air regions and areas, because they really are important.
Inadvertently, I apparently posed a challenge in one of the sessions the first day when I asked if people here could make me feel the sound of the ocean.
In this year's MTF, I was lucky enough to have available hydrophones and to dip my ears in the sea and get a lot of interesting, unexpected sounds and create imaginary aquatic soundscapes.
Nós fomos bombardeados com informação sobre o oceano, e então foi algo também que eu nunca explorei literalmente, nunca explorei no meu trabalho como tema central. E achei que era uma boa oportunidade de explorar como a água, como meio de reprodução de som pode alterar o som, como é que se percepciona e processa diferentes fontes sonoras neste meio. E neste momento sei o objeto, sei que quero trabalhar com vozes e água, ou outras fontes de som acústico e água, a dar-me o luxo de poder explorar, que acho que é importante acontecer aqui também.
So this led to one of the first experiments that combined technologies with oceanographers in the room who had developed ways to measure the rate of glacial melting by using the speed of sound for the British Oceanographic Society. And artists who then experimented with the first ever trial of underwater overtone singing. So completely out there, and there are reasons why we do this, because we discover particular correlations, so we make discoveries that we wouldn't anticipate unless we actually put ourselves out there. And of course we look at the complete cycle of materials, so this was masks that were created from the there's no such thing as waste in an ecosystem, so these were materials that were bought as fresh fish and then turned into leathers and then created into masks. And the following year we started to then question this whole definition of what we were doing there. In the city of Aveiro brought in, curated more with planners and architects and people who were working with me in on the European Bauhaus project, because I was part of the high-level roundtable there with a series of architects. And we wanted to redefine what it means to do urban planning. So urban planning, we felt, concentrated on infrastructure, on the planning of the space, so also spatial planning we had a problem with, because it was really very much about the division of land, and none of it felt like it incorporated modern human ecosystems. And we wanted to really discuss cohabitation with living ecosystems. So we actually put forward the idea of ecosystem living as a theme. This kind of illustrates a little bit an ecosystem where, I love this, someone picked this up from the beach, and it's a natural entanglement. And what's interesting is that industry is always part of it these days. I use this as also premise to talk about all of our digital work, because we are on very, very big digital projects with industry where we create cross-domain collaboration, cross-industry, and systems for enablement for industry. So all of the results serve to show policymakers some evidence of what is possible. So another cluster that was picked up is the ecosystem of shells. And this is the analysis of this was done between a biologist, resident biologist, and a great artist called Max Bereitzer-Smith, a young artist from Berlin, to look at what are the components that make up this ecosystem. And if you look at the connectors, that's the technology that keeps it together. It's called the byssus. The byssus is something that has been actually a bit neglected in our use of materials. So as I say, there's no such thing as waste in an ecosystem, so we looked at every single material and how this works. The byssus was used in ancient times as the most precious thread for making what they called sea silk, which is the ancient Romans, Egyptians, most precious cloth, and also the Han dynasty also wore those. And so, inspired by this process, then, as I say, we use it for leaping off points. Max created 9 lessons from mussels on ecosystem living. And of course, it tells you things like, no need to move, just stay put and get tangled up. Also, incorporate whatever floats past. You can use this as a leaping off point for urban planning if you want. And of course, incorporate technologies, because the byssus is a technology. Now, we also did a manifesto for ecosystem living, and this is based on quite a serious work that we were doing at the time, and looking at strategies to go from linear to multidimensional, top-down to interplay. This is particularly referring to working with civil servants on planning, where what we would like to do is transfer ideas from the ground to the top-level decision makers, for the civil servants to be mediators in this process and create this virtuous cycle. This is something we introduced in the European Bauhaus with President von der Leyen of the Commission. but also small scale to mission driven, so pull out sort of with a big view and actually really look at all of our regions as potential centers for innovation. And this combined with some of the initiatives that were being run in Sweden. So one of the authors, my co-authors there on the manifesto, Jan Åhman, had run this project in a small town of Duved in the north of Sweden, where they looked at circular food strategies and sustainable living, and also transgenerational learning, driven by the community by inviting a series of experts. This is Shigeru Ban, who's with me on the high-level roundtable, was invited to design the greenhouse, because this is north of Sweden. So basically, if you want to have sustainable food, you need to have particular approaches to that. As part of the ecosystem living, then, he took the Walter Gropius wheel from the Bauhaus and then turned it into a new wheel of sustainability. And this is something you can look at, because I will show you just a few pages from our book, which you might be interested in, because it captures quite a lot of this kind of work. So we first commissioned from Jan to produce a prototype handbook with all of these schema about sustainability and about strategies that can be adopted driven by communities. And then, because I was part of this group of people, amazing group of people who were setting the agenda at high-level policy, and this is the very first time that architecture, design, and multidisciplinary then environments that were assembling around architects and designers were really setting the agenda for policymakers, for decision makers, and very much through evidence-based, so basically prototyping, showing what's possible. And what I'm particularly proud of, for example, is Shigeru, as the Ukrainian war broke out, him and Hubert Tramer, who's the Polish architect here, they went, in the first 2 years of the Ukrainian 2 weeks of the Ukrainian conflict, 2 million people were crossing the border into Poland, and we could have had a refugee crisis, as they've been labeled in the past. And instead what happened was that we actually said, no, this is an influx of talent and intelligence into Europe, and therefore what we need to do is enable these people to be as comfortable as possible and to contribute to society. And so they went in person to the borders and started to train young architects to create disaster relief shelters, to give the families dignity, to separate them from each other and stuff. So, and this learning continued. It was scaled across from Poland into Slovakia and further. So super proud for this kind of work that we did from being at the top level advisors. This is another bit that is also in the book, which you'll be able to, I'll give you the link in a minute, but I actually, for the very first time, in order to support such initiatives to scale, I assembled the various different units that manage funds in Europe, so including also the European Committee of the Regions, and then Interreg Europe, which is about collaboration across Europe, and regional funds and cohesion funds, to, for the very first time, talk to each other and actually concatenate the effort, so that what we could do is to leverage ideas from the ground up, plug them into the next funding mechanism, and then not lose momentum, that the next mechanism already picks up the best ideas and scales them further. And 2 initiatives have been run through Parliament since, and have been implemented as we speak. These are some examples of the work that was done as a result of all of these methods being deployed in the European Bauhaus initiative and funded by European funds. So some of these projects are coming to an end now. We're celebrating them very much. So these are just a couple of details. There are hundreds of pages of these projects that are created experiments on the ground, evidence for decision makers to see what is possible to do. If you're interested in reading further, there's a digital copy available, and it's called the Regional Innovation Model Handbook, the RIM book, and it's accessible here. So I'll leave it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michela, for the insightful sharing. Our next speaker is Mr. Sylvester Wong, Vice President and Asia Lead for ESG and Sustainability Services AECOM, and jury member of the design panel. Sylvester has nearly 30 years of experience in sustainable cities and infrastructure. He is a certified planner, investor in prop tech and fintech startups, and an advocate for marine blue carbon economies. Sylvester, please.
Thank you very much. You know, it's been an amazing week of brilliant thinkers. Thank you, Dawn, for inviting. Thank you, Leiby. Thank you to everyone, Sileng and URA. What a topic. What a huge topic. Urban innovation and sustainability can mean so many things to so many people. And we've heard from all over the world. And you know, I humbly submit a little bit of experience from locally, from the sort of Asian context. Now, I'm originally from Berkeley, California. I know there's a lot of alternative thinkers here. Go Bears. And yes, I do. I've been about 10 years at AECOM now, but before that, with a bunch of other design firms. And I got to say, when somebody advised me about jumping back into this big corporate platform, they said, okay, now you have a chance. You know, I've been doing urban design and architecture for such a long time. Now you have a chance to learn from everyone else in the industry, all the engineers and the economists and the geotechnical folks and everybody who makes things work across the city. And so that's essentially what I've been very fortunate to be doing. And then during the pandemic, when it was very difficult to get around and people were finding side jobs and side hustles and stuff like that, people were asking me from outside of the industry, you know, what did I think about things? I had by that time lived a few years in the Philippines after 15 years in Hong Kong. And that's how I got into some of this fintech and prop tech and other things. And I really started to appreciate, you know, the cities, mayors, they were not asking for a new airport at that time. They were not asking for another new town someplace. They were simply asking for the jobs back, the everyday stuff that drives communities. And so it kind of really spoke to something that I think is near and dear to everyone here, that our cities are really about our people, defined by our people. They are our people. There's no city without our people. Can I just look around here and see, you know, a lot of folks on the telecast right now. Can I get a show of hands of folks who studied architecture, not necessarily practicing now, but just I'm conscious of how many credits are being awarded here. Oh my goodness, look at that. That's all right. Now keep the hands up, very interesting. Now, how many are still practicing architecture? Just, all right. Oh, that's okay. There's a lot more hands staying up than a lot of other places that I talk to. Yep, captive audience, very good, right? It's so interesting because, you know, as someone who never got their architecture license, that's me, I really just focused on my planning license and so forth. I found so many opportunities to engage with clients, public sector, private sector, using design language to communicate so much more. And when I think about cities, I think that for thousands of years, people have been coming to cities for really one basic reason, is to find opportunity for themselves and for their families. You know, you look at big cities, small cities, you look at some of these, you know, I remember doing something in Dharavi in Mumbai, right? There's 1.2 million people, and you realize after doing some work there that it's not the same folks. Folks come and they go and they graduate. The Dharavi, this informal settlement in the middle of Mumbai, accounts for 5 to 6% of the GDP of that city. they're creating suites there that end up on your hotel pillow in these 5-star hotels. At that time, there were 3 WHO certified medical production industry inside of that informal settlement. And you realize that these small businesses, whether they're huge, whether they're small, they are the lifeblood of every community. So, recent thing that I wrote as part of some of our digital cities work, there's a QR code, you can scan it. Essentially, and the title is Why We Need to Dream of Electric Unicorns. I hope some of you get the reference to do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, which famously Philip Dick, and was the inspiration behind. Anybody? Blade Runner, yes. So, movies are a big part of what's been inspiring me. And what I'm basically saying in here is that all of this work that we do as designers, as influencers, as policymakers, we're not trying to just incrementally improve our societies by 10, 20%. We really create impact when we're aiming high for that 10 times, 20 times impact. And if we start thinking that way, I'm going to break down those 3 words, right? Urban, innovation, and sustainability. I'll start sustainability first. In a way, I gotta do my corporate sponsor thing. I'll say a little bit about what sustainability means from, this really amazing, vast network of 50,000 people that I work with. But then I'm going to go into something very personal about urban and my last 8 years living in the Philippines, and then finally talk about innovation. And forgive me, I'm going to be fairly tactical about it. But I think that could be really, I hope it's kind of inspiring, because I want to leave you with something that you can use in your everyday work. So we'll start here. Sustainability for, talk about technology. I got to keep this thing going. There's supposed to be a wonderful image on the left that talks about how our industry, construction and so forth, accounts for 47% of the global GHG emissions that get out there. And when we talk about sustainability, at least at my work, we often cover, besides the governance and the really important, basically our impact on climate and the climate's impact on us, extreme weather and so forth. This is not covering everything. This is not the entire definition of sustainability, but we kind of try to figure out where we can help the most. And so we're very proud to work with EDB here in Singapore to create in Singapore a Center for Sustainable Legacies. That's globally, in AECOM, we have our Center of Sustainable Legacies here in Singapore, which is great. And we essentially look after 6 areas. We got to break it down, small bite-sized chunks. And it's answering these very simple 12 questions, how we improve social outcomes by including access for marginalized communities, for creating jobs and boosting small businesses. I mean, a lot of this sometimes very theoretical, sometimes very big targets. You wake up every day as an engineer, as an architect, as a designer, as somebody. You're saying, what am I going to do today to help make that? And so we're trying to break this down. This is what I authored. These questions to break it down, so that achieving net zero is not just some lofty target, but can you do something every day to build a little bit better with less, and reduce the energy that you've got. So anyway, I'll go very quickly through these with a couple of examples, right? So improving social outcomes, I think of this as the most basic thing. Can we empower small businesses? Right? The best for our cities, right? Some countries, 80% of the GDP is small businesses, like where I live in the Philippines. That's a photo from the Philippines. I remember hearing from some folks who went in after the big Chilean earthquakes early in the 2000s, right? And they were so excited about helping these communities rebuild after these massive tragedies. They said, okay, we're flying with the White Knight helicopter. And they said, okay, we're gonna build all of these houses for you. And the community said, wait, no, that's not the first thing we need. We need our boats back so we can get out there and make a living for ourselves. The communities knew what was gonna sustain them, and it was jobs. And guess what the second thing was? The second thing was not housing as well. Anybody, I guess? Second thing were schools. And it wasn't because they needed their kids to learn some things. It's so that the kids had a safe place to be so that both parents could work during the day. It wasn't until number 4 that housing came in. And so that taught me a huge lesson about, and some of the work that we do, harnessing technology, thinking through. After the COVID, in San Francisco, we tried to get 24 transit agencies to stitch back together. It was a chance to reroute how we serve the communities. And so we took a new approach, thinking about social outcomes, and the GIS data that drove the rerouting and restitching was all about how to access low-income housing, low-income houses better, low-income households better, people, not the things. And so when we start going into other things like decarbonization, we think about very simply, can you do better with less? And I've got a great example later, I'll jump to it. It has to do with the bridges that we do. But just to give you a touch, all these ways of approaching things can be applied to all sorts of infrastructure, from metro rail to airports to towers. And you'll see this little kind of graphic because we award projects all the time inside the company. Climate risk. How do you turn risk into value? And more folks are asking about that. They're thinking about asset value. We started many years ago with things like the 100 Resilient Cities projects, and it created a conversation about protecting against these massive, this is a map of Hong Kong, where I lived for 15 years, and all of the typhoon tracks and the mounting and increasing amount of damage and losses. And so now you've got big companies and governments thinking, how do we protect ourselves? We're very happy to start working with the Airports Council International, Changi's part of that, to think through not only protection and operational readiness, but then creating more value because we're making stronger assets for each nation. And so the next would be sustainable growth, growing sustainably. It's essentially harnessing every drop of energy, water, every resource that you've got so you're not wasting. And so, we're no stranger to that here in Singapore. Everybody here has been a part of this amazing story of self-sufficiency. It's an ethos that has come, over the past 60 years, of course. But that kind of thinking has really driven many economies and many developers and many sources of capital to think about beyond just profit and into the circularity of materials. And I'll get into this a little bit later too, but some of the our big clients have been doing great things with timber and with alternative materials that help sequester that carbon. Energy is always a huge issue. I put this very tongue-in-cheek kind of a photo in here because, of course, there are some who are burning lots of energy to get to places. But the idea of self-sufficiency, and we could go into lots of topics about that, a lot of countries are going for, including Singapore, major transitions into renewables. And it's not just generating, but it's also recapturing. I'm really proud that we're doing work here on the DTSS, as some of you know, where by co-locating things, we're recapturing water, right? For some of us who are new to Singapore here, the ambition to recapture up to 55% of our water into potable. Actually, it's not it's the industry that actually loves its water because it's so, consistent in its pH. But we can recapture by co-locating things like cogeneration plants and whatnot. There's just so much. When I started this whole journey of designing cities and doing, I had no idea I would get into it and be exposed to so many of the technical pieces that allow us. But, growing up in California, nature was so important to me. And so I'm really happy that much of what we do is also just simply unpacking and rediscovering what nature does best. And we have a lot of our leading folks in the across Asia in biodiversity right here in Singapore. We've created, but besides doing some really cool things that have increased measurable biodiversity by 2 times in some urban areas in Hong Kong, Here, of course, in Singapore, you might know us for some of our work on the waterways. You may not know that we're doing biodiversity calculators, and we're doing AI-based nature mapping that helps places outside of Singapore as well. Anyway, we did co-write some things with WWF on nature. Feel free to look for it and download. Wow, I went through a lot on the corporate side. So let me take that corporate hat off for a second here. I want to share something a bit beyond Singapore and all these kinds of things, right? Living in the Philippines for 8 years now, it's been such a joy because, again, it comes back to people and small businesses and the energy of this country that is our neighbor here from Singapore. With 115 million people, this is a small little creative hub that I did, not with the corporate hat, just myself. It's been featured in a few magazines and so forth, and it's just beautiful. Hey, you've been there. Yes. And invite all of you to come by. If you haven't, that's the Instagram QR code, comuna.ph. I'll talk about it later. We can plan trips and whatnot. But it's just speaks to this magic of the people of any country or community. And let me share, because I'm so proud to live there, let me share a little bit about the Philippines. Right, 115 million population with 5%, 6% GDP growth. Half the folks are younger than 25. And it's a huge country. I mean, this is a place where, if you lined it up next to California and Oregon, it's as tall as those two states together. And I do this little scale comparison of the greater Metro Manila area. On the left is about a 200-mile economic corridor. About 40 million people live on that map on the left. And same scale with LA, San Diego, and then San Francisco on the right. And the purpose of that scale comparison is simply to say we are coming on to a whole era where, unlocked by infrastructure, we can unleash the power of all these small businesses into a major thing. And why am I sharing this here in Singapore? I think Singapore, the funny thing, and I'm very proud of this, is that a lot of people think that I've moved to Manila from Singapore. They say, all your ideas, they sound like, it's a place that's done it really well, and you're coming and sharing all these great ideas. So kudos to you guys for having all of that reputation. But essentially, I think this is a call, from the countries around you, that everything that you're working on here in Singapore, I challenge us to bring it abroad, to share, to get involved a lot more with the neighbors. There's so much work out there. There's a lot of economic growth out there. The kind of pace has been incredible. Here's my office is inside this area, 2006, right? And just a few years later, that's what's built up, right? 60 times growth in the value of land there. There are issues, and of course, we could use some help to solve it, so come on down. But what's really amazing, and it's hard to do from small city-states, like from Hong Kong or from Singapore, is to appreciate a larger sweep of projects that work together toward nation building. And so I'm just, right now, just sharing with you, you'll see down here, this is not built for this conversation here. It was built for something I do a lot as an urban designer, as a planner, is I get into economic policy and I help, convince investors to look carefully a second time at places that might have been overlooked, like the Philippines. And the master planning is a lot less about just, figuring out where to put trees and open spaces and buildings and whatnot. It's about creating these stories that reach across a whole country about a place for value creation, for creatives versus technologists versus bio, and they're not about exclusivity, it's about just creating this message that there's a place for everybody. And it's been happening, right? I mean, companies, and I like to use FOMO in all of my conversations about who else is already going there. so that folks will start using, even Clark Airport is operated by Changi, which is great. We're already seeing a lot of this co-creation. And I'm going to flip through these so that you just get some eye candy about some of the other types of, very economic development-driven conversations that I'm very fortunate to have. And you'll see that just tracing where investment flows is so important to our message, even as designers. Finally, just a very quick one, and I'm not going to do this justice. We can talk later about this, but essentially, and I'm sure in our conversation we're getting a little bit into AI. Ooh, this is a little scary, right? This is a little more interesting. The AI that we're deploying to help do roadway maintenance in Hong Kong is releasing people to really think rather than just maintain. And my daughter said, when she was 6, she said, "Oh, this is really cool. All the city building stuff that you do," but I kid you not, when she was 6, she said, "Dad, you gotta stop using so much concrete." And I thought, wow, what are these kids being taught in school? This is, that's great, but the last part on innovation, and I'm gonna flip through this very quickly, is about this. You all know about this, all about embodied carbon and operational carbon and so forth. We don't need this. The point about this, though, is that materials matter. And I'm not going to go through this, but I did. If I just showed you 3 pictures of concrete, steel, and timber, you'd be asleep in a second. So I think of these as stories because materials are so important. As designers, materials are so important. It's the fundamental building block of what we can do. And I think every day, whether you're doing a small retail outfit or you're doing a big building, this is going to matter. I'm literally not going to talk about these. You're going to get a feel for what did he want to talk about? The broad gist of this is that we're starting to look through ways of reducing the energy in basic materials. And when we talk about innovation, I want us to think not just about these big, broad, what's bleeding edge stuff, but very much about the everyday things that we can do to move the needle in the decisions we make. Some of it is about timber, some of it's high-strength steel, very cool stuff. And the other takeaway from this is that it's a stakeholder engagement process. It's not just dreaming up, I've got this new approach of doing things, but the success was through lots of walking through with regulators and with policymakers and getting them to buy in. I've said this a couple times this week, is that I don't want to spend my time preaching to the choir. I want to go in to the folks who haven't been sold yet. And that's where I find the conversation most compelling. So, that's my daughter on the right, wearing that hard hat in a project in Manila. But those 3 words, urban, innovation, and sustainability, I hope are less about preaching and the big things. It's really just empowering each one of you to do something great and choreograph what I think is a great city, is when you can't really predict all the great things that come out of it in the future. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Sylvester. Please take a seat over there. Yeah, thank you. We will now move on to our final Q&A of the day. Could we get the rest of the panel members to join Sylvester at the front? Moderating this session is Ms. Kelley Cheng, Creative Director, The Press Room, and jury member of the design panel. Kelley is a modern-day polymath who has immersed herself in roles such as editor, writer, curator, spatial designer, graphic designer, video director, interactive designer, and educator. She is the founder and creative director of The Press Room, known for its diverse and unpredictable creative businesses. Just like before, you will have an opportunity to submit questions to the panelists by scanning the QR code shown on the screen. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Kelley to kickstart the panel discussion. Kelley. Kelley, please.
Good morning, everyone. Sylvester, just now was quite funny. You said that if there's an earthquake in Philippines, the first thing the people want back are boats. In Singapore, if we have an earthquake, the first thing we want back are our HDB flats. And but jokes aside, I think since gaining independence in 1965, public housing is then, I think now still, maybe one of the greatest innovation for Singapore. It was Lee Kuan Yew's vision to give a home to every Singaporean in the 60s where, people are still living in quite a poverty state. So, having said that, I want to pose the first question because this is about urban innovation and sustainability. What is the most groundbreaking urban innovation you have seen in a city in recent years? Maybe we'll start with Michela.
Wow, that's a bit of a difficult question. I'm going to have to twist it actually because the thing that I think is the most valuable piece of innovation is done by my colleague Sheila Patel from India, who runs Slum Dwellers International. What she does is she educates particularly women in those settlements to sustainable living, methods of sustainable living. And as you probably are aware, slums or informal settlements occupy huge swathes of our planet and very, very large populations, and often are overlooked by decision makers and planners or dismissed as an eyesore and nothing more. And anyone who is upskilling and capacity building and introducing strategies for better living in these environments is, at this point in time, a key person. So my colleague Sheila gets the honor.
Thank you. Sylvester?
We all take it for granted, but I think digital infrastructure, I think the ability to produce and create business remotely and connect places has essentially unleashed millions of people who cannot move to a city in order to create livelihoods for their families. So, we lose 7.5% of our GDP to congestion every year in Manila. And it's a jobs housing imbalance. It's because so many people want to just rush in, 40 million people in a small space to find jobs. And the ability now to, create value, not having to all come to one location, I think has been one of the big changes.
Thank you. Michela, you work in the intersection of digital art, design, policy making, and for Sylvester is urban planning and infrastructure. So, what does sustainability mean to you in the work that you do?
I tend to think of it more broadly than the sort of definition of that. Of course, circular materials, the full life cycle of materials are incredibly important. The work with nature, the greening is one aspect of it, but as you saw from the work we've been trying to do, we've been trying to push the agenda to more than human ecosystems, so incorporating other species and other broader sort of perspectives onto the subject matter. So we tend to think of sustainability as a fundamental concept for life, not just in terms of substituting materials or introducing green areas, but in terms of how we behave, how we look to the future, what is the time span that we adopt when we do plan? I mean, is it the sort of, this is the problem also with working with decision makers, is it the next 4 years of their term? Or are we looking at, in transgenerational terms, the children, grandchildren, and the future what future is expected. There was a very interesting comment made by the co-author of the Manifesto for Ecosystem Living, the other Jan. There's two Jans, Jan A and Jan B, so Jan Oomen and Jan Bang. Sorry, Jan Bunge. There is also a Jan Bang. We have too many Jans in our labs. Jan Bunge, he works with Bjarke Ingels quite a lot, but he actually said, we've forgotten something. Our economic systems are now following these very short planning cycles, and it's really damaging our discussion about sustainability. He said back in sort of 19th century, all the banks were owned by families, and they behaved very differently in the way that they managed funds and the way that they invested, because they knew that the business was going to be followed through. It was a family business. It was their future generations were going to benefit from the investments, and this is somewhat lost. And I think there is something to be said about that. And there is a general kind of malaise with this sort of short-termism. So sustainability is very much about the bigger, longer perspectives.
True.
Yeah, 1,000% agree. Sustainability to me is about the sustenance of our ability to change, our ability to adapt. The issues of today will not be the issues of tomorrow. But the ability for the human spirit and for communities to take on, understand, and then adapt to change is very much about the ability to sustain that. Part of it's financial, part of it is philosophical, part of it is just ability to have discourse. We are now finding ourselves in a time when, and we talked about it with some European countries too, we ended up trusting that there would be a net of sorts, a system that allows us to trust that things would happen, and then it can be upended overnight. I'm a big proponent of things like blended finance and private sector incorporation, participation. Governments are running out of money to do big infrastructure, but governments are running out of money to do small, important things as well. So I think sustainability, yes, I do talk about, green materials and things like that, but it's all piece of a broader thing of how can we use the most that's around, use what's around us the best, so that we're not reliant on major things that could get upended in the next election. Talk to me about Philippines and elections and how plans change all the time. But when we enter, contracts which have a ground up almost the way a small business thinks, the way startups who really scrap and bootstrap and focus on revenue, focus on being profitable for themselves, they don't have to answer to anybody. They can move around, and if our communities are able to be that self-sufficient, we can change with the times.
Thank you. In the morning session, I think we touched quite a bit on policy making. And I just want to kind of link that to the topic of sustainability and urban innovation. So, Michela, you've actually sat on, high level as advisors to the European Commission, G7. So, actually, I was reading about you, and just now you also presented about the new European Bauhaus, which is by the European Commission, as I understood it. To give the audience some context of the new European Bauhaus is actually a policy and funding initiative under the European Commission that makes green transition in built environments enjoyable, attractive and convenient for all. Even the smallest communities on the ground deserve living spaces that improve their well-being and sense of belonging. So I thought this is really meaningful and aspirational and quite relevant to what, the topic that we have today, because I often hear architects saying that, hey, I want to be green and I want to be sustainable also, but there's only so much I can do. I can specify a more greener material, but again, it's subjected to my client's budget and all that. So they said, I can do very little. really depends on policy, right? Because in Singapore, there's also some incentives that if you do a green building and all that. So my question is that you actually have a toolkit on this website, the New European Bauhaus, to kind of teach people how to adapt some methodologies in being sustainable as a practitioner. So maybe you can share some of these methodologies.
There's a lot of it that's devoted to capacity building of regional governments and those who commission architecture. Because, of course, investors also, developers. This is about bringing all of those stakeholders who are involved in commissioning buildings, in incentivize, who invest in affordable housing, for example. And it's about putting architects and designers and various people from various also other disciplines, experts in ecology and landscape and preservation and regeneration and all of those in the same room. The idea of evidence-based policy really was something that came from us doing labs over very many years prior to the European Bauhaus being launched. And between 2013 and 2018, I was asked to coordinate innovation recommendations for one of the biggest units funding. And we kept on taking all of the results from our experiments to the panel that was basically advisors who were basically people like head of Intel Labs Europe, who's now on my steering board, and people who were from all the large organizations like Siemens or Orange or big corporates, as well as academic advisors. And whenever I brought a piece of evidence, I said, well, we just experimented with this and this is what the result was. They went, push it straight through. And 74% of all the recommendations came from the ideas that are generated, tested in these environments. So it created something that was so tangible, that was very difficult to disregard. It wasn't just a matter of opinion anymore. And this is why this idea of prototyping, joining people from different perspectives, ensuring that you get these different viewpoints that can illuminate the knowledge and the subject matter, but they can then create tangible evidence, was something that was advocated by Ursula von der Leyen when she did her first State of the Union speech in 2020, where she put architects, designers, engineers, students, and other professions in the same space where they all prototype to generate the sort of evidence. And so some of those methods really very much come from this sector, from architecture and design. We know very well from design education. It's a very long tradition. I come from British design education. I've designed courses for both, run programs both for Royal College of Art and for Goldsmiths, design critical practice and design entrepreneurship and all of those. And these are the methods where we would normally get groups of students to work, and everybody knows how that works. But when you scale that to a multidisciplinary space that's completely transgenerational, completely inclusive, that brings different cultures together, different experiences, different backgrounds, you actually blow up the possibilities of the knowledge exchange, the rate at which knowledge flows, and the discoveries are they're multiplied. They're so much bigger. And then since then we've scaled it. I realized that industry was coming to us, and I created something called the Industry Commons. And this got adopted as a track, the European Commission, as a place where we start to create interoperability across the different industrial sectors, because we realized that there were so many opportunities there, both in terms of economic opportunities, but also in terms of capacity building and lifelong learning, and also identifying where all kinds of strategies, systems that would support and enable breakthroughs in these environments.
Thank you. Sylvester, so do you think that sustainability should happen at the policy making level, or as individual architects, is there something more we can do to move towards a more sustainable city?
Wow, everybody has such a powerful voice, and I think groundswells are important. And in fact, the ability to lean over to somebody who's not a designer, not an architect, kind of bring them along the journey is so powerful. I love the Bauhaus framework in the in places where agrarian communities and whatnot. We always look for frameworks that can help bring not just designers and policymakers, but the everyday folks along for the ride. If you all want to look at something, the Philippine Green-Gray project that I did with Conservation International, it's available on a website, phgg.org. You can look at it on your phone right now. We worked with 11 different cities across the entire Philippines to co-create from the ground up solutions that were, both fighting the impacts of climate change, but would also create local economic activity. And I think that was the key part, was to co-create rather than just dictate, rather than just say, we're the master architect, we can figure out all these things. I mean, our ability to communicate visually with multiple media, with different types of stakeholders is your superpower. And I think the more that you can get out there and just, you can use a framework, you can develop a framework, but what it is a giving guideposts to folks who otherwise don't feel agency in their future, a chance to create and plan ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got a few questions just came in, so I'm going to read it. Okay, so here's an interesting one. We are surrounded by oceans. What are the hidden potentials we can explore for better human living? Okay. Actually, this brings to mind Bjarke Ingels' floating city, right? He actually envisioned this conceptual city that is built on water and that can be replicated. So what's your take on exploring better living through hidden potentials, of using the ocean?
Well, I mean, I would encourage whoever's asked that question to really kind of give it some thought based on some of the things that we've seen earlier, because it's really about you rethinking your mental models. As I said, we are actually limited by some of the systems that we currently have, and really we have to remember that all of the systems that we rely on currently that allow us to explore or to think about these issues are designed according to certain preconceptions and certain mental models. So if you are going to have ideas where roads are what matters, and land traffic is what drives your markers and the way you guide the population sort of to move around the place is dependent on certain things that are prioritized. And of course, your relationship to the ocean is going to be very different than if you actually start to rethink those markers and rethink the way that we highlight what is of value and demonstrate what is of value. A lot of it is, a lot of the tools that we are currently being given, I think you mentioned the importance of the digital tools and everything that we rely on today, there is a lot of room there for improvement. For example, our colleagues, one of the projects in the European Bauhaus is Bauhaus of the Seas. And they proposed to build a school on a ship to educate more about the ocean and the environments and all of the vessels we build and all of our interactions with things that float on the water. And another sort of thing I can perhaps mention is there is a company that started as a startup led by an amazing female entrepreneur who actually was born in Chernobyl, and she was, I think, something like a few-month-old baby when the explosion happened, and she actually died. She had to be revived. And she then vowed to work in clean energy as a result. And she has a company called Eco Wave Power, where instead of big interventions in the oceans to harvest wave energy, they built very small, manageable floaters that individuals or communities can manage, and they can plug them into the grid. They can be actually just literally floating off piers. They have contracts with the whole of the coast of Portugal, for example, and they've just signed contracts, I think, with California. You plug them into the grid and generate additional energy or collect energy in storage for communities, and they can actually power whole neighborhoods with those. So there are people who are rethinking our relationship with the oceans in sustainable ways. And it is very much about us changing our mental models about our relationship first and foremost.
Thank you. So, Sylvester, you're the infrastructure guy. So, what can we do with our oceans?
My goodness, if you asked the 12-year-old me, I would have been, drawing all these underwater bubbles and things like that. Of course, I'm fascinated by science fiction, all sorts of things that we can do. I temper myself a lot. I feel that, living in Hong Kong for 15 years and coming to Singapore a lot, I feel the pressure of the sense of, we're out of land, we need to go find some things. But guess what? When you showed your map, Google map of blue, that was a powerful message. That's 70%. That map represents 70%. And it's blank. And at the same time, we have barely scratched responsible use of the other 30%. We talk about this in Hong Kong a lot about, we should build more. And so people gravitate to each other, and we create value from societies, right? There's so much more we can do with the land that we already have barely kind of managed properly. That I think if we focus on, because I think about supply chain as well. I think about our human supply chain, not just like the vegetables from land, rather than trying to construct something in ocean to create the vegetables that we need. But also, there was a train of thought there. The supply chain of human interaction, right? We don't need to spread ourselves all over the world, I think. And this is, as somebody who's all about infrastructure, and I'd love for our highways group, as much as that we do, to not be the important part of our business. I'd love the important part of our business to be renewable energy and transport, public transport, which it is. We famously have this amazing thing that we designed in Antarctica, which was a rolling research lab. And the point of that was to be able to work with and move into many different parts of Antarctica as weather got really bad and so forth, instead of a fixed thing. Very cool. The tech side of me loves it. And at the same time, I think we only need one. I'm not sure we need to go and conquer the oceans to be a better society.
Talking about the tech side of him or you, this business about all the interventions we do on the ground and all the things that we're trying to do for sustainability on the ground, how far we are from actually translating that into digital strategies, though. Because basically what you need in order to, we first of all have to accept the fact that it's the whole digital thing it's absolutely permeating everything. It's permeating culture, it's permeating all of our decision-making spaces and everything else. And yet it is so divorced from the good work on the ground. So where we do good work on the ground, how do we translate that? And once again, technology is built according to certain mental models, and they're not translated. Certainly the problems we're currently facing are just 99% down to that. Really, I would say that, because we have allowed technologies to be built without those same ethical and moral principles. So what we work on in Industry Commons is this series of enablers that are systems for accountability, where we track and trace assets and IP in systems where you can see where your assets flow. But then systems of responsibility, where we sort of monitor the sustainability levels. We've created recently, we created a legal ontology of IP rights in collaboration with partners, but also a resilience ontology now based on talks with manufacturers and supply chains, because of course supply chains have become so heavily intertwined that you have serious issues with black swan events. I mean, it's not just your own upstream that you need to watch. So you need to be able to monitor what's happening out there, and you need to create systems that are interoperable and where people are coming into a space of common understanding. If they're cut off from each other, it's hugely dangerous. And then you have systems of responsibility like responsible AI, data ethics, things that we feed AI systems, which are, otherwise we have trash in, trash out, and we've proven that over and over again in our labs because we worked with AI for many, many years now and experimented. And then you have systems of beliefs, and if we as a society, for example, believe in mitigating against biases, all data is biased. There's no such a thing as an unbiased data set. But if you actually take any data and you understand the biases inherent in the data, you can apply it in the correct way rather than misapply it, as we know from multiple examples, especially in the US and stuff, some amazing researchers who have been demonstrating how people can be harmed by misapplying data sets. So we need to translate these strategies. This is all about social sustainability, ultimately, social and environmental sustainability. We need to apply those systems into the digital, translate the good work on the ground into that sphere as well, which we haven't done.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you brought up about this, that we are basically our world is permeated by digital, and because we all know that the future of war is not fought with guns. It's a digital warfare, and someone can just put a virus, and you can shut down a whole country. In fact, I mean, in our everyday life in the office, the 3 words that we fear the most: internet is down. So So by the way, guys, this question system where they submit is quite interesting, because someone can submit a question and they can vote on it, which one they want to hear most. So has the highest vote. Right. So listen, cities are competing to be smart and sustainable, but often this leads to greenwashing. How do we ensure urban innovation is genuinely impactful rather than just a branding exercise?
Fantastic question. I love it because we advise our clients all the time about that danger, right? It's and it comes down to information asymmetry. That's the permeating. I mean, we talk about black swan events. We talk about cyber security attacks. The permeating challenge that we have to solve right now is simply information asymmetry. It's the ability to hold each other accountable for what we claim. And I think investing in fintech, so forth. One of the things that I've done is create a network of rural banks, because rural banks are on the verge of extinction from all these digital banks and so forth. But they hold all of the trust in local, provincial communities. And the hardest thing for us when we set this up was adoption, was simply going from 0 to 1, whoever famously wrote that. And so the information asymmetry, when people are trying to claim all sorts of things, trying to do all, it's simply the transparency and against really standardized ways of measuring performance and output. And if we can get the folks at the edge who don't have access to that information a great way to understand it. Infrastructure is one thing, building it out, getting people a phone and so forth. But if nobody turns on the phone to understand what's the difference, then we failed, right? So, anyway.
I mean, adoption is a big deal. It's always been a big deal for us. It's like more than 10 years ago now, pushed into the policy recommendations something called market adoption readiness levels, which was about co-creating with with adopters or with communities, and then demonstrating through the adoption and through the engagement to investors and the scalability of something, rather than waiting for the whole kind of development to complete and to materialize as a cash profit. So you could actually invest and adapt and evolve with communities. But now that we work a lot across the different industrial sectors, it's very much the same strategy. It's about the adoption. It's about building a system, proving it, once again, creating the evidence of really impressive optimization, as well as then it turns out that if you get it right, you get a huge amount of saving of data carbon footprint, for example. So what you're doing is, by solving one problem, you're solving several problems if you do it right. Then you take that to the next big player and you show them what's possible. And they go, well, if I can get a fraction of that, I'm with you. So that's how, but it's a big journey. It's a long journey. It's like, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens through a huge amount of hard work. And, if you really want to massage ideas into reality, then they take a great deal of investment and effort to demonstrate that they can really work. And then you can start to get adoption into these systems that are then establishing more trust and more accountability, more traceability, but then still bring optimization and savings at the same time.
Thank you.
Just
Sylvester,
to complete a thought here, which was, so if there was a message for all of the folks who are in practice here in this auditorium or outside, it's to learn to measure the results. And to hold, to design toward these outcomes and hold yourself, but also your clients accountable to. It's so easy for a designer to say, "I came up with a great idea. I think it's going to achieve this thing."
This is what I said. It was Alan Fletcher, who was a brilliant British graphic designer, said, "If ideas are not massaged into reality, they evaporate." And he wrote it on the cover of Domus magazine, the Italian architecture magazine in the 90s. And he wrote it from bottom up. So he wrote, if ideas are not massaged into reality, they evaporate. So that was it. I highly recommend that that's your motto.
Okay, so here's another question. If you could implement one radical urban innovation tomorrow, that would have an immediate impact on sustainability, what would it be? It's a tough one.
Sorry, someone has an. Did someone say they have an answer?
John, sorry? No reasonable answer. Well, we are thinking out of the box here, so let's we'll give it a try. We'll give it a try.
Well, I don't have one solution fits all situation here. So my main issue about ensuring sustainability is to address some of the pressures we're currently facing, politically, geopolitically, and all the rest of that. I mean, nothing's going to solve that as a kind of miracle cure. I think all the strategies and all the methods that we have been advocating for here in this discussion have been designed towards more sustainable society. And if our ethics are not embedded, if inclusion is not embedded, if our mental models are not taking into consideration all those concerns, it's not going to be a fix. So I don't have a it's like you said, there is no reasonable answer because there is no fix unless we consider the whole system.
I just want to jump a little bit, but kind of related, because you're under MTF, some of your innovators are musicians and artists, and they do crazy things like you show us, dipping the head in the water and all that. So do you think that soft power, like art and music, have
absolutely essential.
can that maybe have an impact on sustainability, or policy making as well?
Absolutely, because well, once again, I mean, you're actually AI dominated already now, and I can sort of demonstrate to you, and I've got. I think you're being being called.
Okay. Sorry.
We have I have another talk this afternoon where it's going to be a lot more focused on technology. But for example, we demonstrated failures of large language models. For example, we did in our labs, we asked large language models to draw a couple where a woman was taller than the man, and it just couldn't do it. It couldn't do it because the trash that it injects from the web basically carries all of the prejudice about that with it, and so the only way it could do it is by asking it to draw a Disney cartoon where a woman was then drawn as a giant and the man was a Lilliputian, and that was the only way it could do it. Now I think we've made such a big fuss about it since we've onboarded all kinds of people from health and from other kinds of industries because there's such simple examples that show you that really what you need to understand what you're feeding the beast. So when you have these environments now, they are churning out a huge amount of results at fast pace that are, a result of neural networks, and the way some of them are results of feeding trash and hallucinations into the system. Mm-hmm. These methods that were adopted previously that were really, ruling the linear methods of deduction and induction. So inductive methods that look at 80% statistical probability, therefore it must be true. Well, not really, because there's still another 20% that is not true. This is why we have black swan events. So basically, these kind of methods of learning that were reliable and that looked reasonable, mm-hmm. whereas design thinking and artistic thinking that was opening up too many possibilities, where designers, architects, they are first of all polymaths, they observe culture 24/7. They train to look at subject matter from different perspectives. They just appeared from the sidelines too chaotic as thinkers. Mm. So they were not, perhaps, it was put down to some kind of instinct. The result was, it's rigor. It's a particular rigor. If you're a really good designer, architect, artist, you apply strict rigor to your research. Now, these are the techniques now. These are the approaches, the methods that are helping us in the environments where we now have to grapple with these new kinds of technologies that are, or these new areas of chaos that are churning things out. So absolutely essential to illuminate subject matter and to be integrated in these development environments.
Yes. Great answer. We have to wrap up already because it's time out. But I just want to ask one last question to conclude the session to you both, actually. You are both no stranger to Singapore. So I want to ask you, what have we done well as a city besides our food?
Maybe I'll weave an answer to the last question and this one together. And I think the greatest one innovation I would love to see is for our kids to have exposure to as many cultures and systems as possible. It was absolutely right. It's no way to answer one question. It's not a fix-it-all, but it's a belief and an investment in the future that people who grow up critically thinking, challenging everything, finding ways to always, adapt to things that we can never dream of, the challenges of the future. If I had to put my bet on one thing, that would be it. And I'm going to say Singapore's done a really good job of trying to make sure there's a lot of different things happening. And I would say the challenge to everyone here and cultures everywhere is to keep doing more, is to keep finding ways to expose our kids to different systems, different political systems, different economic systems, different cultural systems. That's our superpower, I think.
I could be pretty short because I think you probably need it to be short, but it's currently the last bastion of civilization, really, because basically it's the one place that is still upholding these incredibly important values of inclusivity and sustainability and work for the improvement of communities, inclusion of everyone in the process, hopefully. And I think the only thing that could possibly improve, I mean, there's always room for improvement. I'm sure that those of you who are working very hard at it here will have lots to say, but it's this feedback loop, allowing a little bit of that feedback loop to be maybe moderated by the civil servants back to the decision makers, and then start to create a virtuous cycles like this. Because you have phenomenal intelligence that is educated both in the country and comes back from other places. And with a great deal of knowledge they bring to the table and lots of ideas. And I heard last time I was here, one of the decision makers say, you know, we now have a problem. All these young people are coming back saying, we can do it better. So we don't quite know what to do with that. Well, perhaps they should have a voice.
Yes. Thank you so much. So great answers. So more voice from Singaporeans, more cultures, and more political parties. We'll see. It's election year. So yes, can we put our hands together and give a big round of applause to Michela and Sylvester?